You did it. You completed your first novel in high school. Applause to you. But I'm sure, like any teenage author, you're faced with a question like myself. What's next? For me, I completed my first, not technically first full-length novel, but the first one that I think is an updated enough body of work and separate from all the fan fictions and messy fantasy stories I wrote in elementary school and middle school to exist kind of as its own and potentially even become a published work one day. So I wrote this novel, as you may know by watching this channel, over National Novel Writing Month. I spent a large portion of November writing that 50,000 words, but then as I still wasn't done with the novel at that point, I took a little bit of a break, and in December through January I finished up with a word count, I believe, of around a little over 6,000 words. I'll probably have to check that. My project currently sits at 62,483 words, and unfortunately it hasn't been edited since March. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about my experience as a teenage author, my progress within my novel, kind of the roadmap of where I want to go next, and just a little bit of kind of my own backstory along with kind of where I'm at in the whole novel writing process, because I do a lot of talk on this channel about all like my writing and my reading. However, the part of writing that I don't really like to share, I'd like to get just a little bit more in depth in this video. I still won't quite be revealing the plot of my book as it's still kind of subject to change, and I plan to make a lot of edits, especially at camp over the summer, which I will talk about in this video as well. But if you're interested in any of that, feel free to stick around and let's talk about my first novel, my plans, and where we're headed. So like I mentioned, I wrote my first novel over National Novel Writing Month. I did the whole 50,000 bit, and then I moved on to write a little bit from, I guess, about December to January, and then that was it. My manuscript was completed. And to be completely honest with you, I haven't made much progress since then. Originally, when I finished my novel, I was go, go, go. I have a book and let's query, which, if I have to give you one piece of advice, don't. If you're in the writing world at all, I'm sure you know what querying is, but for those that don't, and maybe just casual viewers of my channel, I'm just going to explain it real quick and kind of talk a little bit about it and my experience, at least so far, with the querying process and like talking to literary agents. So I did all my queries through Query Master, and I was a little bit overzealous. I did some kind of minor edits of my manuscript before I sent it off. It wasn't necessarily draft one and then send, but I was so enthusiastic and excited about it that I was just like, that's it, I finished and I made some edits. Literary agents are gonna take it, right? Not exactly. So I queried about, I think it's 10 or 12 agents, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you kind of have to write a little query letter for each. And how it works is you usually do it through like a website or not typically through their company website, although you can, but it's kind of hard to find literary agents on your own. So websites, for example, like Query Master, which I love and I use, kind of compile that for you and kind of just like all the information, and it makes it automated so that you can fill out a form, or in some cases email them and just send your book off. Usually they ask for about the first 10 to 15 pages and just put it out there and see what agents think. So out of those 12 queries I sent, I got one response that wasn't a rejection. One. And this just shows you how important it is to really go into querying with a polished product. The reason why I'm not actively querying and that I stopped after kind of like that first month and a bit was not necessarily because I was discouraged, because that's what literary agents are there for. But what they're not there for is to read a little bit of still unedited, not exactly completely polished or finished work. And although my book technically was finished at this point, it was not ready for querying, not in the slightest. So the one positive response I did get asked for my full. I sent my full, I was ecstatic, and at this point I was kind of just, at least she's reading my full and then giving me advice. I don't even care if she says no, but at least she's not basing it off these first like 10 or 15 pages, which don't even, they convey the book and they do a good job to get it started, in my opinion. Those are probably the pages that I've workshopped the most, but the heart of the book definitely lies within it, which is obviously how every book is. But I was excited that someone would actually read it. So I sent my book off, I was excited. I'm not gonna say the agent's name, but I was super excited, and I didn't even expect a yes. I just expected her to read it, and I was happy that she was gonna read it. And as I expected, I got a no. So I wasn't actually upset at all because, like I said, I genuinely did not have high expectations. I was just happy that she was reading my full, kind of like in general. But then after her kind of saying like, no, the project's not fit for me, like maybe some more development, etc., etc., I don't remember her actual message, I kind of sat back and I was like, you have just finished this book. I don't think it's ready to send off. And in hindsight, again, if this is the one advice I could give to you, don't start querying too early. In fact, querying is something that takes a lot of work and almost like, it's exhausting in a way where you're just getting rejected constantly. And personally, I don't mind the rejection, but I know it can definitely get to some people. And for me, more the aspect of just filling out the same form every day and you know, like just picking out these random agents. It's almost like throwing spaghetti at a wall, and it like 99% of the time just like does not work. But that's just how it is. And so that bit of it does make it a little exhausting, and I definitely would say that if you don't have a polished and finished product and one that you genuinely believe is ready for an agent to see, don't do it, because I definitely went into it too early. And I've talked to authors since then, and they were impressed by the fact that I had written a book, but when we talked about the querying process, particularly this one author that I spoke to, she was like, yeah, you probably aren't ready. And I was like, yeah, I kind of realized that now. But then I was just too excited. And so that's kind of my first bit of like progress where the book is at right now. It's currently kind of just sitting there. Since I've spent so many months on this project, pitching it and working on it, and actually just like the writing of it, I'm kind of just taking a step back to let it marinate and stew. And that might sound quite silly to someone who might just be like, get the project done, but I think for authors, sometimes it's just best to leave the idea and then come back. So my plan at the moment for my book, and just kind of like the future of my writing, is that this novel, the novel that I wrote that is currently completed, I am going to focus on largely editing it over the summer once my school is done. And once I go to Barnard for a creative writing program, I'm going to email ahead and say, hey, anyone I can work with on this? And I'm sure there will be. And so I'm really excited to work on it over the summer, but for now it's been placed on a back burner, and that's kind of where it's at. Although before that, I did submit it to Scholastic, and I did win the honorable mention, which was really exciting. It felt great to be acknowledged for that, but I definitely think it still has a lot of a way to go. And once you get to kind of the end of a novel, it's just almost more of a struggle, because the writing is the fun part, especially for me, and I'm not so much of an editor, so at the moment I'm kind of at like a crossroads. But I think I've kind of concluded to just let it stew for the minute. But how hard was it actually to write a novel, to write a full book in high school? This is a question I get a lot, even from adults. They say, how did you manage to do that in a month? How do you have this book? What is going on? And for me, I think it primarily boils down to being forced, especially through the challenge, to make time for my writing. For me, writing is something I've always done. I've done it my entire life. Like I mentioned, I have several other books that I wrote in middle school or even elementary school, and they are definitely something. I had a notorious habit of elementary school of just starting these books that would be super lengthy and then just abandoning them. In middle school, I did finish a few of my first books. I had a book series with a questionable fantasy plot line and other things that I made my poor friends read, and they all were like, Emma, this is so great, you should get it published. Anyway. So that was a thing for a while, but for me, once I got into high school, I was constantly working on this one project, which I'd still really like to explore, but it was definitely an idea and kind of like a sentiment that I wasn't as connected with at the time. It was something that very much came from the brain of my 8th grade self, my middle school self, and I just couldn't really connect with it as much as to like fully write it into a full novel. And so at that point I decided that that one was going to go in the vault for the moment, and it still is there. However, I think about it sometimes. But then once I sat down and decided to do this whole national novel writing thing, I was like, okay, I can do this. And one of the things that I really think is the most helpful, especially to like writing and storytelling and getting inspired, is I keep like a notes app on my phone. And I know, what are you doing on your phone? How Gen Z? Trust me, I know. I would do it in a pretty little notebook if I could, but my phone is with me everywhere just for safety reasons and stuff. And so whenever I get inspired, I just just a few sentences in the notes app, and I kind of just write down what I'm thinking. And then when I get to moments like this, for example, in my, I think I started thinking about this project my sophomore year, when I sat down and I said, I'm gonna do National Novel Writing Month the summer between my sophomore and my junior year. And I said, this is what I'm gonna do. And then the minute I decided that, I was able to refer to kind of the notes app and be like, all right, this one seems like it could be a full-length novel. Could I write about this one for a month? And that was kind of very helpful in going into it. Before the month, and how I actually wrote the book, was I made, first of all, a character document. I believe I do have a video on my channel about prepping for National Novel Writing Month, so feel free to check that out. I believe it's up here. No, I think it's reversed, so it's up there. So I prepped for that by just kind of making character profiles first, kind of coming up with an idea of how they looked in my head. I can't draw like to save my life, so I did end up having to use a digital program to kind of create a human that looked very vaguely like what I had in my mind. And once I did that, I kind of came up with background, etc., and then I moved on to plot. Now, the most helpful thing I would say in just like writing a book in general, it depends on the type of writer you are, and the advice that I will give applies specifically to me. I know some people who can just sit down and go, and I can be like that. I definitely can. I can sit down and type something out if needed. However, when it came to endurance and writing over the whole of this month, and then what ended up being about 2 months afterwards, I needed a roadmap of where I was going, and that was simply it. So I ended up writing out just kind of a little brief summary in a Google Doc. Looking back, I think I would have changed this to make it more scene. Oh my god, my cat is attacking a bug. What are you doing? I forgot what I was saying. I created a more like theme-based outline, as whenever something would thematically or like fundamentally develop or change in the story, I had a little blip for it in the thing. So I didn't really have it divided by chapters as much as it was divided by like story progression, as much as it was like god, I keep getting distracted. It was mostly divided by like story progression is what I'm trying to say. And something that I wish I had done, which I'm kind of already starting a little bit of the editing. I know I said I was leaving it on the back burner, but the little bit of the editing I did was kind of a kind of scene overhaul. And that is something, if I had more time in October before I started this book, that I wish I would have done, simply because when writing, I kind of had to, my cat is jostling my tripod. I had to divide up the scenes and kind of like the theming and how the chapter flow would work myself in the moment, which I think made it definitely a lot less smoother than it could have been. And that's definitely something I want to change on like the second edit. So I think if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, what do I do planning for a book? I would say the most helpful thing that I wish I would have done is not only create an outline, but create a specific scene outline. And then just, for example, when I'm doing my re-edit, what I have is I have scene, you put the setting, you put the characters, and then you put like the beginning and the end, and then what is like thematically changed continuity wise, and like maybe a little bit down below you could do like what's the next question, because fundamentally in writing, scenes are just a pattern of conflict, solve conflict, conflict, solve conflict, just in general. And so I definitely think that would have been really helpful to me when first writing, and that's definitely something that I want to fix on the rewrite. The other question I've kind of been thinking about, and a few people have asked me in my personal life, is will I hire an editor? Well, first of all, I am a high school student. I don't really have the funds to be doing that. So at the moment, it's kind of just me and my peers. And I think at some point I might enlist a professional such as a teacher. However, let's be completely honest, teachers work way too hard as it is. Their jobs are nuts. And as someone who's had teachers in their family, I really respect it. And I don't think I'm ready to enlist a professional adult yet. However, within my family and my support system, I've started sending my book out to friends, family members, people that I just kind of have asked to read it. And opening it up like that a little bit more has allowed me to get some outside perspective for the edits as well. So I definitely think that once you finish your first draft, it's not a bad idea to have someone else look at it. But for me, and especially other high schoolers, if you're watching this video, I know a lot of us aren't really in position to hire a professional. I'm definitely not, and I probably won't be unless I ever get a book deal. I don't know. no one does, but for me at the moment, I'm kind of relying on myself, edits, and then also the support of others. And one thing that I found super helpful in the editing process is just reading things out loud. And I know this sounds like nuts, and very tedious. But for me, when you write lines in your head, it definitely sounds correct, but then when you go back later, and I especially know that I realized this while reading other people's work, that other people needed to read their things out loud to make sure they made sense, because they didn't make sense to me because I wasn't the one who wrote them. And I realized that this applies to my own work as well. Simply, what I write I think will make sense to me, but if I read it out loud and actually analyze it, or just if I'm having a bit that I'm having trouble with, reading out loud is just like a complete game changer. I know you might sound crazy. I know that's not something a lot of people like to do. I personally am not super comfortable with having my things read out loud, but it's something I'm growing to accept, especially as I've kind of started going out of my comfort zone more with writing things, such as like I had a event where I read something I wrote out loud and it was vulnerable, but definitely progress. And I think just getting comfortable with something like that can really immensely help the editing process. That's definitely something I also want to do once I start kind of like the revamp of my book, is just read scenes out loud and just make sure especially the dialogue, make sure that it flows well. The last thing that I kind of want to talk about, just like with my book and where I'm headed in general, is kind of like the daunting aspect of editing all of it. I've talked about editing for a few minutes now, but for me, the bit that's the hardest is kind of seeing the overarching vision. And I've heard a lot of different advice for this, kind of like how to deal with it, but the one that I've heard that I'm the most interested in, I think, trying out is kind of just making like a roadmap, or like a tactile, like putting post-it notes on a wall and seeing where things are at and moving them around. Almost similar to like Little Women, where she writes her manuscript like on paper, obviously, and then like will flop the pages and the chapters. And I just think like something about that could be potentially very helpful for my book. So I think that once I start developing and doing a little bit of round 2 editing and hopefully making it a bit more polished, that would be helpful. So thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if this video was kind of a little all over the place. I didn't really have much of a script. I kind of just had a lot of thoughts, and I realized I hadn't talked about my writing in a while, and with summer coming up and the time for me to work on my book coming up, I figured I'd kind of put out like these ideas into the universe and kind of just give a little bit of my thoughts and my advice and just where I'm going with this project next. I'm obviously proud of myself to be able to have done this in high school, but I'm the type of person where I always kind of want to do a little bit more and do a little bit better, and that's definitely a mindset that I think can be helpful, but also a little draining at times. So at the moment, the book is being put on the back burner and it will stew over there, and I'm just gonna out of my mind until summer comes, and then we'll pull that thing back out and get to work. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your guys' support and just kind of listening to me ramble for a little bit. But yeah, I'll definitely be making some videos about that over the summer, editing and the like. Also at camp, of course, I'll be filming some stuff. But let me know if there's anything specific you'd like to see, any questions you have about my writing, or kind of where I'm at in the process, the querying process, just anything. Feel free to ask it down below, and I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching my video, and